Clover doesn't take over a lawn by being tougher than grass. It takes over by cheating in a way grass simply can't compete with. And once you understand the specific trick it's pulling, the fix stops being about fighting Clover at all and starts being about taking away the one advantage it has. I got the clearest explanation of this from a soil fertility specialist named Marcus Ibe, who's worked with a regional turf supply cooperative outside Des Moines, Iowa for over a decade, helping homeowners and small landscapers figure out why their lawns aren't responding to standard advice. He told me something that reframed how he thinks about clover specifically. People treat clover like a weed to spray, he said. It's really a symptom of a lawn that's running on empty. Here's the mechanism. Grass needs nitrogen from the soil to grow, and in a lean, underfed lawn, there simply isn't much of it available. Clover doesn't have that problem because it's a legume. It hosts nitrogen-fixing bacteria in nodules on its roots that pull nitrogen directly out of the air and convert it into a form the plant can use. It brings its own food supply. In soil where grass is starving, clover is sitting comfortably, completely unbothered by the exact shortage that's holding the grass back. So a lawn that's gone heavily to clover isn't really losing a fight against clover specifically. It's a lawn where nitrogen has been low long enough that one plant's built-in advantage finally showed up visibly. This is worth sitting with for a second because it explains a pattern a lot of homeowners have noticed without ever connecting the dots. Clover often shows up first in the exact spots that get the least attention. A strip along a back fence, a corner that never gets fertilized because it's out of sight, ground near a driveway where runoff washes nutrients away faster than elsewhere. Those are consistently the lowest nitrogen patches of a property, and clover finds them reliably, almost like it's reading a soil test nobody ran. It isn't magic. It's simply the one plant in the yard that doesn't need what's missing there. This connects to the mowing height principle from our weed spray video. Shading the soil starves weed seeds of the light they need to germinate. Clover's advantage works on a completely different axis though. It's not about light, it's about nitrogen access, which means the fix here is feeding, not shading. Once you understand that, the fix reframes itself. You don't need to fight clover directly. You need to remove its one advantage by making sure the grass around it has plenty of nitrogen too, at which point clover's self-feeding trick stops mattering. Because the grass, which grows faster and thicker than clover under good fertility, starts crowding it out through sheer density instead. Timing this feeding matters as much as doing it. Early fall, roughly the first couple weeks of September in most cool season regions, is the ideal window because the worst summer heat has broken and the grass is actively hungry and ready to use nitrogen for growth rather than just surviving stress. Marcus was clear that spring feeding, while tempting because that's when a rough-looking lawn draws the most attention, mostly ends up feeding the weeds right alongside the grass and pushes soft top growth that doesn't build root reserves the way fall feeding does. In fall, nitrogen gets driven down into root development and stored energy for a strong spring greenup, rather than spent immediately on visible top growth. He drew a distinction here worth remembering because it's easy to lump all fertilizing advice together as roughly interchangeable. A spring application and a fall application deliver the same nutrient, but the plant is in a fundamentally different physiological mode in each season, actively pushing new top growth and preparing for summer stress in spring versus building root mass and storing energy in fall ahead of dormancy. The same bag of fertilizer produces genuinely different outcomes depending on which of those two modes it lands in, which is part of why fall-applied nitrogen shows up as thicker roots and better clover resistance the following year, while spring-applied nitrogen mostly just shows up as faster mowing. A slow-release nitrogen source, whether that's a bagged slow-release fertilizer or composted manure, applied at a moderate rate in early September is the target here. Fast-release heavy nitrogen applied during a hot stretch risks burning the lawn rather than helping it. Going slow and steady in cooler weather avoids that entirely. Within 3 to 4 weeks of a proper early fall feeding, you'll typically see the lawn deepen to a richer green, and clover coverage will start visibly thinning as the grass around it thickens and shoulders it out. Not an overnight disappearance, but a genuine shift in who's winning that competition for space. Marcus put a number on this that's worth remembering because it clarifies why patience matters here. His general expectation for a moderately clover-heavy lawn, given one correctly timed fall feeding, is a meaningful but partial reduction in the first year, clover thinning noticeably without necessarily disappearing entirely. It's the second consecutive fall of proper feeding on a lawn that's also being mowed tall enough to shade the soil, where the shift becomes dramatic, because by that point the grass has had 2 full growing seasons of adequate nitrogen to build the kind of density that leaves clover with almost no open ground left to occupy. Expecting a full turnaround from a single application sets people up to feel like the technique failed when it's actually working exactly on schedule. One honest caveat worth naming: this feeding approach addresses white clover, the common creeping clover most home lawns deal with. If you're seeing a taller, more upright clover variety with a different growth habit, or clover that's persisting even in sections you know are being fed adequately, it's worth a soil test before assuming nitrogen alone will solve it, since occasionally there's a compaction or drainage issue underneath that's giving clover a foothold independent of fertility. Now, the second piece, and this is the one almost nobody actually does, because it's genuinely just an afternoon of physical work rather than a product you buy. Crabgrass has a specific, exploitable weakness. Its seed only germinates from the very top half-inch of soil, where it can actually sense light and warming soil temperature. That's the trigger it's waiting for. Bury that seed deeper than half an inch, and it never receives the signal to sprout at all. It just sits there, dormant indefinitely. A thin layer of finished compost spread across the whole lawn, roughly a 1/4 inch deep, which works out to about 3/4 of a cubic yard per 1,000 square feet, does exactly that. It's not primarily a fertility move here, though it does feed soil biology over winter as a side benefit. Its main job is physical. It buries that season's dropped crabgrass seed below the depth where it can ever detect light again, quietly smothering next year's crop before it ever has a chance to sprout. A practical note on sourcing and applying it. Finished compost, the dark, crumbly material that smells like rich earth rather than anything raw or sour, spreads most evenly with a wide, flat-bottomed shovel worked in a consistent motion across the lawn, or a specialized top-dressing spreader if you're covering a larger property and want more even distribution than hand spreading can reliably achieve. Whichever method you use, the target is genuinely thin. You should still be able to see grass blades poking through the layer once you're done, not a solid brown blanket. Piling it on thicker doesn't bury crabgrass seed any more effectively past that 1/4 inch depth, and a heavier layer risks smothering the grass itself along with the weed seed you're actually targeting. Iowa State University Extension Soil Science on crabgrass germination confirms this light and temperature-dependent trigger is well documented. The seed genuinely requires near-surface positioning to germinate, which is exactly why burial through a light top dressing works as a mechanical prevention method rather than a chemical one. It's worth understanding why this works so specifically, because the same logic explains why some prevention methods succeed and others fail against crabgrass in particular. Crabgrass seed can remain viable in soil for several years, sitting dormant well below the surface without ever germinating, simply because it never receives the light and temperature cues it needs down there. It isn't that burial kills the seed the way a chemical treatment would, it's that burial keeps the seed permanently waiting for a signal that never arrives, as long as that compost layer stays in place and isn't disturbed by heavy aeration or tilling in the following seasons. That's a meaningfully different mechanism than corn gluten meal, which stops a germinating seed's root from developing. This technique prevents germination from being triggered in the first place. The timing for this matters. Apply it a couple of weeks after any fall overseeding you've done, once new seedlings have established enough not to be smothered by the compost layer themselves, but still while the season allows the compost to settle in and start feeding soil biology before winter fully sets in. A wheelbarrow, a shovel, and an afternoon spent spreading it evenly across the lawn is genuinely the whole process. No special equipment, no ongoing product cost beyond the compost itself, which runs roughly $10 a bag at most garden centers, or nothing at all if you're already running a compost pile. Marcus mentioned this is exactly the kind of step that gets skipped, not because it doesn't work, but because it's unglamorous labor rather than a product you can buy and apply in 5 minutes. Most homeowners stop once seed is down and raked in, and the compost top dressing step, despite being one of the more effective, low-cost pieces of a full fall program, ends up being the thing that separates a lawn that keeps a crabgrass problem in check year over year from one that's refighting the same battle every single July. There's a compounding effect worth mentioning too, one that ties the two techniques in this video together rather than leaving them as separate tricks. A lawn that's been properly fed through fall for nitrogen and clover suppression is also a thicker, denser lawn heading into the following spring, and thicker turf shades soil more completely, which independently reduces how much bare ground is available for any crabgrass seed that did somehow survive the compost burial to actually establish in. The feeding step and the top dressing step aren't really two separate fixes running in parallel. They're reinforcing each other, with fertility building density and density closing off the remaining opportunities weeds would otherwise exploit. If this changes how you think about that clover patch, hit subscribe. We're covering these overlooked fall techniques one at a time, no filler. Go watch our overseeding video for the full seeding process this compost step builds on, and our fall recovery video for the broader early fall routine this feeding schedule fits into. Both cover ground this video intentionally didn't repeat. Tell me in the comments, is clover or crabgrass the bigger problem in your yard right now? I read every comment. See you in the next one.